Every old Jedi spent a lifetime training inside the same system, and Luke Skywalker became more powerful than all of them by never setting foot in it. In canon, Yoda, at the height of his 900 years, fought Palpatine to a draw in the Senate chamber and had to retreat. Luke, decades later, turned Palpatine's own Force lightning back on him, not because of his bloodline, and not because the Force picked favorites, but because every advantage he carried compounded into something the old Jedi structure could never produce. The Legends timeline follows Luke for decades after the fall of the Empire. What happened across those decades explains why his power kept growing long after every previous Jedi had peaked. Every Jedi in the Old Republic began training as an infant. They were taken from their families and raised inside the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, where they learned how to think, feel, and use the Force before they were old enough to walk. By the time a Jedi reached adulthood, 15 to 20 years of institutional conditioning had shaped every instinct. Their emotions had been trained away. Their connection to the Force had been filtered through centuries of rules they never chose. Luke missed all of that. His training with Obi-Wan lasted a few hours aboard the Millennium Falcon. His training with Yoda lasted a few weeks on Dagobah. Both teachers died before they could finish. In the Legends novel, The Unifying Force, the picture is plain. Luke's training had been rushed. He had been left to pursue his own counsel and find his own way to mastery. He also had to rediscover abilities the Old Republic Jedi already knew. The burst of speed was standard in the old curriculum, a baseline technique traced in the Legends reference book, The Essential Guide to the Force. Luke did not stumble onto it until years after the Battle of Yavin, during a fight with a combat droid on Coruscant. He taught himself a power the old Jedi had been handing down for generations. Everyone treats that gap in training like a disadvantage, but Luke also missed 20 years of being told he was too risky to train. He missed a lifetime of being taught there was only one correct way to use the Force. He missed the pressure to conform, to specialize, and to stop asking questions once he reached a certain rank. Because Luke never absorbed the old doctrine, he was free to build something the old Order's structure would never have allowed. When he finally recovered old Jedi training materials, he did not use them to replace what he already knew. In the same guide, Luke discovered the 300-year-old wreck of the Chulanthor on Dathomir. Inside were data tapes on training, meditation, and lightsaber forms. Because he had never received a traditional Jedi education, he studied the tapes to supplement what he already understood. He was building on top of experience the old system would have stripped away before it formed. The academy he founded on Yavin 4 reflected that philosophy. It was a place for learning and open discussion, rather than obedience. He accepted adults, permitted marriage, and embraced 4 strong families. Every one of those choices had been forbidden under the Old Order. Later in life, after decades of experience, he still did not claim to have reached the finish line. Luke still felt like he was in training every single day, and he would not have had it any other way. In the Old Order, mastery was treated as an endpoint. Luke treated it as a starting position, and that difference shaped everything that followed. Luke did not just avoid the old system, he inherited the full record of its failure. Every mistake the Jedi had ever made had already played out by the time he was old enough to rebuild. The Republic had already fallen, the Sith had already won, and the Clone Wars had proven that even the largest Jedi Order in history could be destroyed from within. In the Legends novel Destiny's Way, a politician asked Luke whether he was comfortable departing so far from Jedi tradition. Luke answered with total certainty they had already lost that power when the old Jedi fell. He was not being arrogant. He knew the results of a test he never had to take, and he could read those results in full. His advantage reached even further back. After the Battle of Ruusan, 1,000 years before Luke's birth, the surviving Jedi imposed radical new restrictions. They decided it was too dangerous to train anyone who had already felt fear or anger. A policy traced across the Essential Guide to the Force. Only infants would be accepted. Most recruits would never see their families again. For a full millennium, Jedi grew up inside a system designed to prevent another disaster. Not one generation questioned whether the cure was worse than the disease. Not one generation tested whether children raised outside the temple might have been stronger for it. 1,000 years of emotional suppression, family separation, and rigid conformity had produced a Jedi Order so blind that a Sith Lord served as Supreme Chancellor for over a decade. not one of them noticed. The Jedi of the Old Republic genuinely believed the Sith had been extinct for a millennium. Even Yoda believed it. Luke inherited that failure as a data point rather than a wound. He could study what went wrong without being trapped inside the system that caused it. If you want to see more videos like this one, a quick subscribe means you will always be first to know. The old Jedi did not just make mistakes though, they buried them. What Luke found in those buried records opened doors no previous Jedi walked through. The Old Republic Jedi erased the entire planet of Dathomir from their archives, an act documented in the Essential Guide to the Force. A previous Jedi Council had exiled a rogue Jedi there and did not want anyone to find out. When Luke discovered that buried record in the ruins of a Jedi hideout on the ice planet Tula, he pulled the truth back into the open. Eventually, he followed it all the way to Dathomir itself. He also gained something nobody else in the galaxy could offer. In Destiny's Way, Vergir turned out to be a Jedi of the Old Republic who had spent over 50 years living among the Yuuzhan Vong. Luke could feel her power, restrained but genuine, shaped by a careful education that nobody alive still practiced. What made Vergir so valuable was not just her knowledge, it was her ability to challenge Luke's assumptions from inside the very tradition he was trying to rebuild. Her questions cut at how the Jedi perceived the Force, pushing back on ideas Luke had taken for granted and offering a kind of living perspective that holocrons could never replicate. Because holocrons stored information, but Vergir could argue. She also confirmed something Luke had suspected for years. In Destiny's Way, she returned to a galaxy she barely recognized. She had expected to find thousands of Jedi. Instead, she found a few dozen half-trained replacements. For Vergir, the fall of the Old Order was a blow. For Luke, it was a lesson he had already absorbed and acted on long before she arrived. Luke's education went far beyond inherited history. The Jedi of the Old Republic trained inside one institution with one curriculum. If a Jedi stumbled on a new Force tradition, the Council could review it, debate it, and usually restrict it. The Council locked away knowledge that did not fit the approved framework. Luke searched the galaxy for everything the old Jedi had missed. Luke and his fellow Jedi discovered multiple Force-using groups after the Battle of Endor, encounters cataloged across the Essential Guide to the Force. Some had evolved entirely on their own. Others had formed after ancient contact with the Jedi or the Sith. Luke did not catalog them from a distance. He learned from them directly, absorbing techniques no Jedi had practiced in centuries. From the fallen Ozzy, he learned illusion techniques powerful enough to cloak his entire Jedi Academy from outside detection. From the Gen Sarai and the Matukai, he absorbed combat philosophy and physical force training that the old curriculum had never included. But the clearest proof of how far he reached came from Ossus, where he discovered the Isana, descendants of ancient Jedi who had evolved over thousands of years into users of primitive force magic. He recognized what they were, brought them into his order, and eventually moved the entire Jedi Academy to their planet. A world the Old Order had forgotten became the foundation for the new one. In the Legends novel The Courtship of Princess Leia, Luke encountered the Dathomir witches firsthand. He could feel the Force radiating from them, powerful and wild, unlike anything he had sensed before. One clan leader radiated so much power, it was as though her physical body were a shell hiding blinding light. The old council had erased their entire planet from the records. Luke trained their warriors. None of those traditions compared to what Luke gained when he walked straight into the dark side itself. In the Legends comic Dark Empire, Luke infiltrated the reborn Emperor Palpatine's stronghold on Biss. He knelt before the Emperor and pretended to serve him. Luke gained knowledge of the dark side during that time by reading Palpatine's own books, a period covered in the Essential Guide to the Force. He absorbed secrets that had been forbidden to every Jedi for millennia. He studied texts that described how anger, concentrated by will in the body's vital center, could create a portal through which vast energies poured through. He learned how the dark side sent storms across space and how consciousness could survive the end of its physical form. It was a gamble that nearly cost him everything. Leia traveled to Biss to pull him back from the brink, and there were moments when even she was not sure he could return. But by the time Luke turned on Palpatine, he had absorbed enough dark side knowledge to turn the Emperor's own weapons against him. He launched Force lightning at a Sith Lord, who who believe he still held the leash. Mace Windu had deflected Palpatine's lightning with his blade and still could not finish the fight. Luke turned the dark side's own power back on its greatest practitioner with his bare hands, and he carried the lessons from that period forward. He did not pretend it had never happened. He integrated what he had learned into his broader understanding, just as he did with every other tradition. The old Jedi drew from a single well. Luke drew from every source the galaxy had to offer. The reason the old Jedi never took the same approach was structural. The Jedi Council was a 12-member body that set policy for the entire order. Every new idea had to survive committee review. Every departure from doctrine had to be argued past people whose identity was built on defending tradition. The council changed slowly when it changed at all, and the larger the order grew, the harder it became to change course. The Jedi Order went through many changes over thousands of years, but as the essential guide to the Force makes clear, the most telling ones were reactive. After the Great Hyperspace War, they built schools. After the Great Sith War, they tightened recruitment. After Ruusan, they locked down everything. Each reform came after a catastrophe, not before one. Between crises, the Council defended the status quo. The Jedi who questioned tradition either fell in line or left the Order. Only 20 Jedi Masters ever officially renounced their commissions, a group known as the Lost 20. Most of them left because of ideological differences that the Order could not absorb. By the final century of the Old Republic, the Order had drifted so far from its original purpose that an entire generation of Jedi served as military commanders without questioning it. Luke had none of that weight. For years, he was the only Jedi in the galaxy, and he answered to nobody. When he chose to accept adults for training, no council could overrule him. When he chose to permit marriage, nobody stood in his way. When he chose to study a Sith holocron rather than destroy it, the decision was entirely his. The Jedi had begun as a meditative order who believed that they could balance light and dark by always staying in the Force. But as the Republic's leaders kept asking for help, they became adjuncts of the government, then marshals, then warriors, drawn little by little away from the Force and into the ordinary business of politics. Because he was standing outside the system that caused the drift, Luke could see it clearly enough to reverse it. When his rebuilt order started fracturing, with masters pulling in opposite directions, he did not hope for consensus. In the Legends novel The Swarm War, he spent a full week in deep meditation sending a force call that reached every Jedi in the galaxy. Then he stood in front of them and laid out a choice. If they could not put the Order above their personal agendas, he was asking them to leave. The Jedi had been growing since Endor, both in size and in strength, but now they were threatened by an enemy Luke himself had brought into their midst through his own misunderstanding of the old practices. He then took the title of Grand Master, a rank the old council had been designed to prevent any single Jedi from holding. The old system spread authority across 12 masters specifically to keep any one Jedi from gaining too much control. Luke took that authority because no one else could hold the Order together, and he was willing to answer for the consequences. Luke created a new Jedi Council that included politicians alongside Jedi, a reform tracked in the essential guide to the Force. When that experiment ran its course, he severed ties with political entities and formed the Master's Council, which relocated to Ossus. Each version of his order reflected what the galaxy needed at the time rather than what tradition demanded. The Jedi Archives had held a collection of Sith holocrons. The Council locked them away from all but a handful of masters. When Count Dooku stole one before the Clone Wars, nobody even noticed. Luke's approach was the opposite. When his order recovered both a great holocron and a Sith device called the Telos holocron, he let his historian Tion study the Sith device. 4 Jedi had to be present at all times, and medical scanners ran constantly. Luke controlled the risk without eliminating the knowledge. The Old Republic is usually remembered as the Golden Age for Jedi, with thousands of members, a sprawling temple, and resources beyond measure. But the final decades of that Golden Age were consumed by war. The Clone Wars turned Jedi into generals fighting on dozens of fronts. They had no time to meditate on the deeper mysteries of the Force. Then the Purge swept away almost all of them before any of that wartime experience could be processed. Luke had something the late Republic Jedi rarely enjoyed: stretches of time between crises when he could search, experiment, and study. Before he even founded his academy, he spent months tracking a Jedi records curator who had fled Coruscant during the Purge. He followed this man's trail to a ruined hideout on the ice planet Tula, a journey told in the courtship of Princess Leia. He was looking for the wisdom of the ancient masters, their thoughts, and the deeper mysteries of how the Jedi had trained their warriors and healers and seers. Most of them had been wiped out with thermal detonators and EMP grenades. Luke walked through tunnel after tunnel of blackened storage cells, each one filled with melted slag where holographic recordings once sat. The knowledge of 1,000 generations had been reduced to cinders, but each failed search on each dead-end world pushed him deeper into research no wartime Jedi could have pursued. He visited over 40 planets looking for traces of the old Jedi Academy. He only stopped when he realized it was not a building, but a starship called the Chuanthor, sitting half-sunk in a tar swamp on Dathomir for over 300 years. On Ossus, he found an ancient book about Jedi battle meditation written in a language so old only a protocol droid could translate it. Battle meditation was a technique the Old Republic Jedi once used to turn the tide of entire wars from a distance. The knowledge had died with the Purge, and Luke had to rediscover it from a text that had been buried in rubble for centuries. Once translated, the book gave him access to a power that most living Jedi did not even know existed. He recovered the Asli Crimson holocron from Bast Castle, Darth Vader's personal fortress on the planet Vajun. It was a teaching device built by a Jedi Master with over 200 years of experience at the Coruscant Temple. The holocron contained information about a wide range of ancient events, including tales of Old Republic Jedi and their wars against the Sith. It had been sitting untouched in a Sith Lord's home for decades until Luke pulled it out and put it back to its original purpose. In the unifying force, he spent weeks on the living planet Zonama Sikat working through deep questions about the Force. He wondered whether the Jedi who originally settled there had not taught the planet about the Force, but it reawakened something already inside it. Luke's understanding of the Force kept growing on Zonama Sikat, question by question. A wartime Jedi would never have had the space for that kind of reflection, because the Clone Wars Jedi were fighting for survival while Luke was building a library. He needed every piece of that library. His enemies demanded power the old Jedi never had to develop, because their training had been built for a narrower set of threats: battle droids, separatist armies, and the occasional Sith Lord. 6 years after Endor, in the Legends comic Dark Empire, the Emperor returned. Palpatine had been transferring his consciousness into clone bodies, cheating death over and over. It was not the first time Palpatine had fallen, and it would not be the last. A lightsaber form could not solve a problem like that. Defeating a being who could relocate his spirit into a new body required a depth of Force knowledge that the old Jedi curriculum never covered. Then came the Yuuzhan Vong, an extragalactic species completely invisible to the Force. Luke could not sense them, read their intentions, or influence their minds. In the unifying Force, the problem was not with the Yuuzhan Vong, but with how the Jedi perceived the Force. They had failed to grasp how much grander and more far-reaching the Force truly was. Even Vergir, a fully trained Jedi of the Old Republic, could not entirely explain the gap. Luke accepted that his own understanding might be incomplete, but the Yuuzhan Vong did not just expose a gap in his training, they exposed a gap in the entire Jedi tradition, stretching back thousands of years. The Clone Wars asked the Jedi to fight harder. The Yuuzhan Vong War asked them to think differently about the nature of the Force itself. Later, in the Legends novel Fury, Luke dueled Darth Caedus aboard a Star Destroyer in what Caedus later reflected was the most ferocious lightsaber fight of his life. But the duel was not even Luke's most impressive display of power. In the Legends novel Invincible, Luke developed the ability to interfere with Caedus's Force visions. He concentrated so hard in meditation that he kept inserting himself into the futures Caedus was trying to read. Then, he deliberately acted differently from what the visions predicted, forcing the real future onto a different path. He hid Jaina Solo's approach behind a wall of misleading possibilities. He was running a strategic operation against the flow of time itself. Yoda sensed the future in fragments and still could not see through the dark side shroud that hid Palpatine for a decade. Luke was rewriting what another Force user saw when he looked ahead. Every future where Luke personally fought Caedus ended in darkness. He was the only one who could guarantee stopping his nephew, but every path led to the dark side. So Luke did something that only decades of compounded knowledge could produce. He stepped back from the fight he was built to win, screened Jaina's approach from Caedus's foresight with his own meditation, and let her finish what his power alone could not. Everything Luke learned across every tradition and every enemy fed into something no previous Jedi had ever built. He treated the Force the way a scientist treats a field of study, constantly searching for new information, testing what he found, and weaving it into everything he already knew. While other Jedi had mastered specific techniques and then moved on, Luke kept circling back to old questions with new tools. Every tradition he absorbed gave him a new lens for examining problems he had already solved, and every enemy he faced taught him something the old curriculum never covered. He recovered the Tedran holocron, a device holding thousands of years of Jedi knowledge across multiple gatekeepers. He was the last person to converse with it before the spirit of Exar Kun ended it. Through the hologram of the ancient Jedi Master, Voto Siask Boss, Luke learned details about Exar Kun's fall that no living being remembered. He was pulling data from a source 4,000 years old, and that data helped him understand the very spirit that had attacked his academy from within the temples of Yavin 4. The Great Holocron went even further. Its scope was so vast that even the longest-lived Jedi could never have studied it completely. Luke treated that not as a warning, but as a challenge, and he set Tion and other scholars to work cataloging its contents for future generations. While training his sister Leia, he stumbled onto a completely new method for detecting Force-sensitive individuals, something separate from the midichlorian blood test the old Jedi had used. It came from his own experimental approach, from probing how the Force worked at its deepest level. The method did not exist until Luke found it, and nobody taught it to him. He discovered the Kyber crystal on the planet Mimban early in his career and experimented with it for years rather than shelving it. He found its power faded with distance from its temple, but he kept testing. He eventually discovered that fragments could serve as lightsaber-focusing crystals. The resulting blade was remarkably efficient and strong. The old Jedi used the Force. Luke studied it, and that distinction made all the difference. Luke started from zero, but instead of rebuilding the old system, he built something that had never existed before, a single point where all of the galaxy's Force knowledge could converge. By the time he stopped counting, Luke wasn't the last Jedi. He was the first of something else entirely, and he was the only one who knew it. The old Jedi rebuilt the same house every generation, same blueprints, same locked rooms. Luke used every blueprint he could find, walked into every room, and never put up a ceiling. Near the end of the Yuuzhan Vong War, Luke achieved a battle meld with Jaina and Jacen Solo. The connection ran so deep that the three of them might have been sharing a single mind, as if that shared mind had become the Force itself, a moment captured in the Essential Guide to the Force. Luke Skywalker did not inherit the Jedi Order. He replaced it with something the galaxy had never seen, a system built to preserve every piece of knowledge it could reach. But everything Luke built could not stop the one failure the old Jedi never had to face this way. The boy Luke trained with his own hands, his sister's son, would become the very thing this new order was built to prevent. So watch this video to find out.